All right, I want to go across to a very special guest. Sir Martin Wolf is the chief economics commentator with the Financial Times newspaper. He's now joining us. Thank you very much, Sir Wolf, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. I want to start off by the pictures that came earlier this week from Tianjin in China, and you're a very close China watcher. The images of Modi, Xi Jinping, Putin, engaged in a warm conversation, camaraderie. How do you view it? Do you see it as simply a photo opportunity, or do you see this as some kind of a reset in ties?
I think that's a very, very big question. And at this stage, I don't think we know the answer. But it could be the beginning of a major reset. These are very early days, as it were. And the powers involved, particularly India and China, have a great deal of history and a great deal of suspicion of each other. I know both countries quite well as foreigners can, of course. And I know this very well from long discussions over decades. In India's case, more than half a century. So there are grave suspicions. How closely they can cooperate, we don't know. But clearly, Mr. Trump's behavior towards India and India's behavior more broadly in the world has created tremendous anxiety, anger, and doubt about the future. And inevitably, any player will try to find alternatives ways of organizing their lives when they found that one of the major players has become, to put it very bluntly, so crazy and so unreliable. Given this, it is quite possible, and I predicted this, that if the Americans behave in this way, they will create a coalition, a cooperation at least, among major powers who really feel they have no alternative. And India is, of course, a leading player in this.
I'll come to the inherent contradictions or the limits to which an India-Russia-China partnership can actually happen in a second. But I want to focus a little bit about Trump and his actions over the last couple of months. Certainly the secondary oil tariffs, which were imposed only on India for importing Russian oil. Do you reckon that played a big role in India sort of moving away from the U.S. camp, as it were, and moving slightly to the Russia-China camp? How much did that sort of accentuate this move?
Well, be fair, I haven't spoken to any senior Indian leaders. I've been on holiday. You know much more than I do on this, but I would take it for granted that this has been quite a shock. It was a huge shock to me. I really did assume that relations between the United States and India under Trump and Modi would be rather good. I also assume that the Americans regarded their relationship with India as among the most important they have in the world. So this has been a tremendous surprise to me, and I think every other analyst I know. And we don't understand the reasons either. I mean, Mr. Navarro has produced an article in the FT, his advisor, Peter Navarro, trying to explain it. It doesn't make any sense to me. But there it is. That's what they've done. Given this, as I said, India has to find alternatives. This doesn't mean there's a close relationship. The old principle is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if the United States is now a hostile power, or at least in some ways a hostile power, and these tariffs are acts of war. I mean, this is economic warfare, absolutely clearly. Then, of course, India must look for alternatives. So I take it for granted that they will look for alternatives. This doesn't mean there will be a warm, close relationship between India and China. That seems to me inconceivable. But it might be a practical relationship in which opportunities explored for trade and for other forms of cooperation, and, of course, for dealing with the United States, which is a threat to both of them, it now appears.
It's very difficult to use logic or rational arguments when it comes to Trump's actions. But I just want to go on what you said about Mr. Navarro, and his statements are not being viewed very kindly here in India, but just his economic rationale as he laid it out in the FT article that he wrote. India says that, look, we're not even the biggest importers of Russian crude. So the economic argument that we're being punished with these oil tariffs for importing Russian crude should apply to China. If it's Russian gas, it should apply to Europe. So if it's not, if the economic rationale or the economic argument doesn't add up or doesn't stand, then is Trump doing this for other reasons, and what may possibly those reasons be?
Well, as you say, I found Mr. Navarro's attempts to produce a rationale for what is now being done, and particularly the rationale for hitting India really above all others, completely specious. But I found everything Mr. Navarro has said on trade policy since he first emerged as a senior player in the Trump system, completely specious. I mean, I think most economists would agree with me on that. So, no, that doesn't make any sense. And then you ask the question is, well, were there some other reasons for hitting at India? And all I can say is, I haven't been in Washington and I haven't been in Delhi. I don't know of any. I thought that one of the pillars of American foreign policy, one of the few things on which they had been consistent over the last, what, more than 2 decades,
Yeah.
starting with the Manmohan Singh government, that they wanted a closer relationship with the United States and vice versa. India wanted a close relationship with the United States. The US wants a close relationship with India. So it really has been a tremendous shock. There are two things that Trump has done that I find completely impossible to understand. The first were all the threats against Canada and the trade war with Canada, and the second has been this trade war with India. Everything he does is, to me, basically nuts, but these are a different order of magnitude of nuttiness.
There's been a lot of media reporting about this, including a long piece over the weekend in the New York Times, speculating as to how things got so bad and so quickly between India and the United States. And one of the things that was mentioned there was this rather testy phone call between Modi and Trump back in June. At the end of the sort of conflict between India and Pakistan, Trump wanted a greater, more public acknowledgement from India, thanking him for his role in mediating a ceasefire or bringing about the end of the conflict between India and Pakistan. He also wanted India to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize, which the Pakistanis were happy and willing to do. Do you think it's personal pique that has led to this?
Well, that seems to me a far more plausible explanation in this case and more generally with Donald Trump than any rational argument. For example, they complain that India trades with Russia, but it's absolutely clear that Mr. Trump wants to trade with Russia. I mean, that's clearly one of his objectives. He is notably and noticeably trying to soften sanctions on Russia, and it's pretty clear that he hopes that when a deal of some kind is reached over Ukraine, they will be able to trade with Russia again. So that doesn't seem a very plausible explanation. So it may be, in fact, that he's just angry about Modi because Mr. Trump is very vainglorious, obviously, very sensitive, and he really, really, really cares about how he's viewed by people. He wants to be glorified. Look at his ludicrous cabinet meeting last week, if I remember correctly. He really wants to be seen as the great leader. And maybe Mr. Modi hurts his feelings.
Okay. Now I want to come to the point that you referred to, or at least referenced to in your first answer, as to there are possibly limits, maybe even suspicions to how far close India, China, and Russia can come together. Certainly, in the case of India and China, there's a contested border. There is military clashes that have happened even as recently as 5 years ago. So you would sort of hold your horses before proclaiming this as the new alliance of the East, would you?
Well, quite apart from those points, which are obviously right, there's also trade problems. I mean, China is the world's most competitive producer of most manufacturers. And I know very well that India has shown already and continues to feel, quite understandably, considerable anxiety about the implications of that for the Indian economy. So I find it very difficult to believe, I may be wrong, but I find it very difficult to believe that India will now say, okay, have lost the US markets and we're going to look for the Chinese market. And to do that, we're going to liberalize we're going to liberalize and China is going to liberalize in each other's favor. Because I think India will suspect reasonably that if there is an equal amount of liberalization on both sides, China will come out as the winner. And so it would have to be a very special sort of deal, and it couldn't be just a bilateral one. It would have to be something much bigger and more global for India to feel that those markets are the future. And if you look at India's comparative advantage, particularly in services, high-tech service, and all the rest of it, well, Western markets are natural markets. And the US is, of course, a huge market. And making up for the loss of the US market with the southern markets in these cases, I'm not an expert, I haven't looked at that in detail, but it doesn't look very plausible to me. And finally, of course, we've already discussed the many deep foreign policy differences. So it's an opening, but a really, really close, intimate economic and political partnership. I must say, having followed this for much of my life, I find it very difficult to believe that's going to happen.
So if India, so what you're basically saying is this strategic partnership between India and America over the last 20, 25 years had a certain logic to it, and that is the biggest threat to American superpowerdom would come from China, and the only country in this part of the world which is comparable in size and heft is India, and therefore it makes sense for India and America to come together. Obviously, the last couple of months, Trump has turned that whole thing on its head. But if somebody were to sit him down and say that, look, we need to get back to how the relationship with India was prior to, let's say, June or July of this year, you think it's still possible, or do you think there's too much bad blood now? The trust has been broken between Modi and Trump, the two principal characters, for it to go back to how it was.
Again, a wonderful question. The trust in Trump must have been very seriously damaged, but it remains the case that a very close, a good relationship at the very least between these two countries is obviously, self-evidently, in the interests of both. I mean, that's why it happened. It wasn't out of love. There's been a long history of suspicion between the two countries. I don't need to tell you that, going back a long, long way. But they got together for very good reasons. These reasons haven't changed. The policy that the American administration is currently following vis-a-vis India is, to me, absolutely incomprehensible from a realpolitik, a national interest point of view. Now, many, many people in America, including lots of Republicans, I would have thought the overwhelming majority, know this and recognize this. So lots of people around him will certainly be saying, Mr. President, are you sure? Do you really want to go this far? Shouldn't we find a way back? Now, the question is are these rational arguments, which everybody would agree with? Just read Foreign Affairs, the leading American foreign policy magazine. They've got articles on this, these broad issues. Of course, people will say this. Will that matter to Donald Trump? Because Donald Trump, there's no other word for it. He's an egomaniac. That's who he is. And will he care if he feels he's been hurt by Mr. Modi, that he is what he tends to call a nasty person? I don't know. Predicting Mr. Trump is really, I think, hopeless, as has been shown in this case. What will and should India do in response? I think they should try through back channels to try and get them to change these policies, just because they're crazy for everybody. But they also have to look for alternatives. It's a shock, but India will, of course, have to find ways through it.
All right. So, Martin Wolf, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, as always, for your thoughts and perspective into what has been a very dramatic last couple of months, certainly in the case of India-US ties. Thank you.